Hello everyone, welcome back to BrainScratch. I'm your host, John Lorden, and today we're going to be looking into a case that has really taken a lot of work to try to understand and has left me, of course, with more questions than answers. That's why it's here on BrainScratch. This is the case of Jelani Brinson, and Jelani is someone that actually lived in Minnesota in the Minneapolis area. And we're going to take a look at what happened around this case, and I'm going to share some thoughts and theories about why this case has yet to be solved, and maybe all of you can help with that by including more information in the comments below. But let's get started here. Here we have a picture of Jelani, and keep this beanie in mind. This is going to be important a little bit later as we go on into his story. Here is a blogger page set up by Jelani, and he has done some writing on it. Right here from his profile page, you'll notice on his introduction, his first comment is Christ our life? If we surely live by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God, it will bring us on our face. It will bring us into a clear and radical contradiction of everything that is about us. It would unfit us for the world. We would be radically out of place. And that's a quote apparently by Art Katz from Careful How You Live. You may be the only Bible some person ever reads. And I took a look at all of Jelani's posts. He was kind of active on this blog a few years before his disappearance. Many of his posts are about his faith and about art that he is reading or consuming that is giving him some more insight into his faith. He seems like a very intelligent and nice young man, and we should take a look at his last post here. Here on Wednesday, August 6th of 2008, we see some pictures of a beautiful baby. This is his daughter, Zion. And there he is with the baby's mother. You can see this seems like a pretty happy man to be holding his daughter in his arms. And below that we get into a soccer promo, which is apparently for a team that he played on in college. He seems to really love soccer as well as his religious beliefs. And that is about it on his blog. There was one other thing I noticed which I found just a little odd, in particular because of what type of case this is, but for his location, he has it listed as Murdapolis. And I wasn't sure when I first saw that if this was some kind of indicator about potentially what might have happened to him, or if maybe someone that had done something to him updated this profile or something. So I did just a quick search at Urban Dictionary, and Murdapolis is another name for Minneapolis. It was coined by the media a few years back when Minneapolis's homicides were at an all-time high. I've seen other information saying that this is a part of Minneapolis. It's North Minneapolis, and basically in the late 90s, early 2000s, they were having a severe problem with homicides in that area. They have since bolstered up task forces and apparently helped try to combat that. So it is a bit of a common term for that section of Minneapolis, but it does just strike me a little bit weird considering the rest of his content. This isn't a guy that's trying to represent himself as some type of gangster or something like that, at least from what I can see of his online persona. This is a person that is really much more about sharing his love of religion and Jesus Christ in particular. So that comment just struck me just a little odd, but I think it's just something he decided to put for his profile. There is another blog called footprintsattheriversedge.blogspot.com, and they have an article on this whole case. We're going to jump into the middle of it a bit so we get a little more insight into who Jelani was. Alice Hamilton said her son, who graduated from high school at Fourth Baptist Christian School in North Minneapolis, was recently promoted at the local Sprint store where he worked. He and girlfriend Dina Anderson have a 9-month-old daughter, Zion, who he was crazy about. The couple lived apart, but he cared for his daughter 2 days a week. Anderson said Brinson talked about marriage often. He was active in his church, and his faith makes it unlikely he would have harmed himself, Hamilton said. Brinson's parents were divorced, and he had been living with his father, Donnie, who was helping him to care for his daughter. Donnie Brinson was watching his granddaughter on the night his son disappeared. So at this point, you're probably wondering, John, you're giving us all this lead up. What the heck happened to this guy? Well, the short of it, and we will get into much more detail, but the short of it is he had a night of kind of bouncing around town. He went to several different locations, and it seems a little odd just in that he was driving to these places and he probably only had a handful of minutes to spend at each place. But ultimately his goal was to go to a house party that was going on, and he got to the house party. People there say that he was only there for about 5 minutes before he seemed to get a phone call that upset him. He left, he went outside to have a cigarette, and within another 5 minutes they noticed he still wasn't back, so they went outside to look for him and they could not find him. Fast forward over a week and his body is found in a pond in a local golf course. So he goes from missing person to deceased in a very quick time frame, and there are many questions around this case, and we also have a pretty detailed timeline that we're going to jump into. But I just want to give you a little more backstory about Jelani here so we can remember what type of person he was on top of this tragedy. A family statement released by Brinson's godmother, Mammy Singleton, said, "The Brinson and Hamilton families are deeply saddened by the loss of their beloved son, Jelani Dante Brinson. Jelani was 24 years old and very involved with his spiritual growth and development. He was a beloved son and brother. He was also a devoted father to his 9-month-old daughter. Jelani had a loving relationship with the mother of his daughter. He was loved by his many friends and relatives. We will miss him dearly. The circumstances of Jelani's passing are not completely clear. We do know that he had a joyous spirit that was manifested by frequent laughter and numerous acts of kindness. He is survived by his parents, Mr. Donnie Brinson and Miss Alice M. Hamilton, his brother, Mr. Jamari L. Brinson, and sister, Kai Z. Brinson, his daughter, Zion Melissa Grace, and Zion's mother, Dina L. Anderson. Funeral arrangements will be announced early next week. We are deeply grateful for all of the love and support we have received and thankful for all of our blessings. And once again, I just want to call you to this particular link in the description box below. If you're going to look into this case more, this blog has a very good overtelling of the story, but what's almost better than that is after that, at the bottom, the comment posts. And there are a lot of people that apparently care a lot about Jelani that are commenting in this comment thread. It's huge. I really don't have time to go through it with you guys, or I would go through it piece by piece. There's a few people that seem like they're trolling the comments a little, but it's really not that bad. And there are some people that seem to be close to him and trying to give pieces of information. Something else I found interesting about the comments in here there are links to news articles about this case, and most of those links are unfortunately broken. Thankfully, some people did paste the entire contents of those articles, so this actually turns out to be a fairly good social commentary on this case with people that are likely related in some way or know Jelani, but also a decent repository of some of the news articles that you can't really find online anymore. So this is a pretty valuable link if you want to look into this case. There is another blog spot. I believe this is the Charles blog. And I just found this one article in particular. These are friends of Jelani's. They talk about what it was like to have him around and then to cope with him being gone. And it kind of has a pretty beautiful ending in terms of their revelation that, you know, he was such a religious person and he was always seeking God. So how can they be sad that he is effectively with God now? So I just thought it was really cool, and I'm going to include that in the links below for you. So let's get to the research, and I have to thank, believe it or not, we had 2 researchers and an author on this. I'll give you a little bit of information on the author in a moment, but a regular BrainScratch researcher, Christy Strasiner. Christy, thank you so much for all your help. I really enjoy working with you on these cases, and of course the conversations we have outside that. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And J Swan Kilo J, who is a newbie but wanted to contribute to this information, sent a bunch of great links and had a very clear passion for this story, and I really appreciate that you, the audience, brought up this story so many times that it finally kind of caught my attention, and I was able to dive into it deeply. But I couldn't have done that without the help of Douglas L. Gilbertson, who is co-author of Case Studies in Drowning Forensics. And I have links down below to a Google book preview of this book, which is actually a college textbook. And the preview has, I think, over 120 pages or so. It's a significant portion of the book. So you can really check out some of the other cases in the book. Professor Gilbertson actually reached out to me because of videos that I had done on the smiley face theory, and he co-authors this book with one of the detectives that basically came up with that theory. And some might say that some of the cases they review in this book are, well, not some might say, some of the cases they review in this book definitely are connected to that smiley face murder theory. I'm sure if you guys watched that BrainScratch, you know that I am a bit critical about that theory. I don't know if I hold a lot of personal stock in that theory, but Professor Gilbertson was really cool to reach out to me, and I asked him because my researchers were asking me, they were saying, John, we saw some of the information on Jelani that's in this book. We would really love to see the rest of it. Professor Gilbertson was kind enough to get us that chapter so we could all review it, and we have, and there are some very interesting developments. They did some really good work on that book. Now, admittedly, guys, it's expensive, but there are ways that you can get into that book for a little bit cheaper. For example, I think you can rent it on Amazon. I've got a link down below for the Amazon link to it as well. And the rental price isn't so crazy, but it is a college textbook. So if you're looking to buy a physical copy, you're probably going to be spending over $100 to get it. All that being said, after me reviewing this one chapter, I can tell you the approach that they take in this book, the information that they share in this book is very well handled. Some of the science that they weave into it really gives you some new perspective. We're going to touch on that a bit in this episode later, but it is pretty well done work, so I just wanted to kind of put that out to you guys. And if you're interested in this, I do recommend that you check out Case Studies in Drowning Forensics for yourself. So let's get started. Jelani Brinson, age 24, was last seen April 17th, 2009, around 10:30 p.m. in Anoka, Minnesota. Recovered April 25th, 2009, approximately 1 p.m. at the Green Haven Golf Course in Anoka, Minnesota. He was black, 5'9", 150 pounds, had his hair in cornrows, was last seen wearing a black t-shirt, a black hoodie, and blue jeans. There's also an investigating agency, which is the Anoka County Sheriff, and I am going to leave that information in the description box below. I am hopeful that someone out there might bump into this video at some point that has information, and if you are that person that has the information, please don't sit on this. Please let this family get a better understanding of what happened to Jelani and send that information into the authorities. I'm sure there's even ways that you could do it anonymously if you want to. If you need help with that at all, if there's some way that I could be an intermediary, please feel free to contact me. You can always send me private messages by going to my YouTube channel page, click the About button, and then click the Send Message button. But really, if you're out there, please do the right thing. Get the info to the authorities on this so this case could be closed. On Friday, April 17th, 2009, Jelani Brinson, 24, disappeared from a friend's house at the 600 block of Kennedy Street near the Anoka County Fairgrounds in Anoka, Minnesota. At about 10 o'clock that night, just 5 minutes after arriving, he reportedly left the residence without any apparent problems prompting him to leave and without even saying goodbye. The other thing that's tough about that was, according to the story the friends told, he had ridden there with one of them, leaving his car at a parking lot many miles away. So how he was able to leave is a bit of a question in itself. Detailed timeline. Jelani left his father's house where he stayed. His father, Donnie Brinson, was watching his daughter. 7:30 p.m., Jelani arrived at Mad Jack's Sports Cafe in Brooklyn Park, where he spent about half an hour interacting with various coworkers. Even though Jelani's mother was at this same bar when he called her cell phone, she didn't hear it ring due to the noise, and they never saw each other. 8 p.m., he met with another colleague from the Sprint store on Jolly Lane, and the two of them went over to another Sprint store on Colorado Lane, where he talked to another set of coworkers. Jelani had recently been given a promotion and a raise. Before the promotion, he was working at the stores on Jolly Lane and Colorado Lane. His promotion moved him to another store in Edina. 8:30 p.m., Jelani spoke with his younger brother at his home in Brooklyn Park. Brooklyn Park is also where the Colorado Lane Sprint store is located. After trying unsuccessfully to get him to stay at home that night, Jelani then returned home to his father's house and played with his daughter. The chapter that we got from Professor Gilbertson gives a little more insight into this. Apparently, Jelani had been speaking to his brother about the fact that there would be some marijuana at this party, and Jelani had tried it a few times. He was looking forward to trying it again. Outside of that, he apparently was not a big person to do drugs. He didn't even really drink alcohol. He would have the occasional beer. He really loved coffee. That was kind of his thing. Apparently, he was a huge fan of, the book doesn't really name it, but I think it's Starbucks they're talking about, but there's other big chains out here. But some big chain coffee he was always drinking. And he also was known to smoke cigarettes from time to time, but outside of that, no hard drug use. But he was talking to his brother about going to this party, potentially to use some marijuana. His brother didn't want to and was trying to get Jelani to stay home, but unfortunately he didn't. 9 p.m., he left there to go visit with the girls from Mad Jack's Sports Bar. They had since moved to Victory Grill on Colorado Lane. According to witnesses, he never made it to the Victory Grill. During this time, at about 9:21, one text message was sent from his phone. At 9:48 p.m., he updated his Facebook status and typed in, "Expect the unexpected." There's something that always gets me about these weird updates. I know Prince, for example, had some strange social media updates right before he died as well. But compared to Jelani's other social media, this comment, I think some people could wonder, did he even type this himself, or was this typed into his phone by someone else? I'm certainly not positive. All of the above movements were verified by eyewitnesses, CCTV camera, as well as phone calls, text messages, and Facebook updates. However, the information below was provided by the men who were at the party the night Jelani disappeared. 10 p.m., Jelani arrives at the house party. Edgar says that he gave him a ride to the house in Anoka, leaving Jelani's car in a parking lot near the Colorado Lane location. The house was rented by a coworker at the Sprint store, Matthew, in Brooklyn Park. His half-brother Daniel lived with him. Statements to investigators indicated that one of the activities that night was smoking marijuana. At 10:05 p.m., Jelani received a cell phone call that seemed to upset him. He left the house through the front door to smoke a cigarette. 10:10. When Jelani did not come back into the house, the three of them went to look for him on foot throughout the neighborhood. Daniel told investigators that he was in the basement at the time of Jelani's arrival, but he did see Jelani leave out the front door and run southbound. That is why they went off on foot in that direction to look for him. 10:20, his mother Alice returned her son's earlier phone call but made no contact. At that time, the three guys from the house party claimed that they were still walking around the neighborhood looking for Jelani. 10:30, friends from the house party set out on foot heading south to find Jelani. After driving around searching, they ended back at the parking lot his car was still parked at, next to the Victory Grill in Brooklyn Park. 11 p.m., the last call made from Jelani's cell phone to another cell phone. This call went through a cell tower located next to Carver County Soil and Water Building at 11360 Highway 212 in Cologne. Given the tower's location and height and the surrounding terrain, a signal could have easily reached out about 10 miles. And I've seen some banter back and forth about this particular phone call. In the chapter that was provided to us by Professor Gilbertson, they also state that essentially the cell phone tower is picking up Jelani's phone in that area. However, I did find one article, and I don't know if this is just misstating it. And actually, it's a piece of an article here because they want you to subscribe to see the rest of it. But police are focusing on phone records that show a call was made from Brinson's cell at about 10 p.m. Friday to a phone near Cologne in Carver County. And that is much different. So I'm really not sure which way to go in this case. However, the distance, here we're going to take a look at a map. This is where the house party was happening, up at Kennedy Street. You can see there are some train tracks that run through here, and here is the golf course. This is the pond where he was found. And Cologne is way, way, way down out over here. However, keep in mind that it could be up to 10 miles away from this with how that cell phone tower, the distance that it's able to reach. So if they are saying that it was Jelani's phone, that it did indeed hit that tower, for some reason his phone was in this area approximately an hour after he disappeared. What I find strange about that is, why is he out here for an hour when his last known location is at this house party up here, and his body is found over here? And his body was found with his cell phone. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to me that that it was his phone that hit this tower out here. I think the story about that being the receiving tower for the other person's cell phone makes more sense. But man, would I love to see the cell phone records for myself, and in particular the ping data, which I think could shed so much more information in terms of his movements that night and help verify some of this. Even in the chapter from Case Studies in Drowning Forensics, there are some big questions about where he really was. He says he's going to this place. His father says that he looks out the window and he sees Jelani sitting in the car in the front lot. So there are some big questions about his movements that night. Saturday, April 18th, Jelani did not show up for work at the Sprint store. At 2 p.m., his mother calls the police and reports him missing. Family and friends go door to door asking about Jelani. They drove all through the neighborhood and scoured backyards. No one had seen him. At 7 p.m., those same friends from the house party decide to go look for Jelani again. They retraced their path in the neighborhood looking for clues. They also explored further out and ended up behind the neighbors' homes to the south. There, behind a tall wooden fence, they found Jelani's winter hat and a shoe. Same hat that I told you about from that photograph earlier. That hat and apparently one of his Adidas shoes was found. And if we take a look at this map again, basically here's the house. Somewhere around here is where the hat and shoe are found by his friends. Unfortunately, they actually pick them up and handle them themselves, then turn them over to the police. So by the time the police get it, they know that the evidence is essentially contaminated. They decide to not even test it for fingerprints because it's been handled by so many people at this point. 12:57 a.m., April 19th, Sprint pinged Jelani's cell phone and it was not returned. Sunday, April 19th, early in the day, about 50 to 60 volunteers got together and began searching roughly a 3,000 feet by 3,000 foot box that extended from the home where Jelani was seen south to the local Perkins and then eastward to Highway 47. During this search, Jelani's girlfriend wore one of his hoodies throughout the day. She walked from a spot by the train tracks near where his shoe and hat had been found to the river on the east, and then west down to the Outpost Bar and Grill in the nearby town of Ramsey, then finally back to the starting point. Later that day, Jelani's girlfriend's brother-in-law found his other shoe amongst a pile of steel tubing on the property of the Bolduc Company. After picking the shoe up and handling it, the brother-in-law placed it in a paper bag and gave it to police. So once again, we have contamination problems with that evidence. And here is the Bolduc yard right over here. So you get one shoe and his hat found here. Across the train tracks, his other shoe is found here. And eventually his body will be found here. Seems pretty conspicuous to me in terms of drawing a line. If you go from where his body was found to a shoe here, to a shoe here, to him last being seen here. Do his three supposed friends that live in that house have something to do with that? Or is someone trying to make it look like they did? I don't know. One of the things that's very curious about this case is when they found Jelani's body, they noticed, of course, he didn't have his shoes, but his socks were still on, and they were clean. Apparently not even a grass stain on them, which is one of the reasons why law enforcement pretty quickly concluded someone had put him in the pond. The autopsy confirms he did not drown, but the big problem with the autopsy is it can't identify how he died. Apparently there's no heart attack. Apparently he didn't suffocate. There is really no explanation as to how he died at all based on the autopsy results. They did do toxicology results as well, and they did note some traces of cigarettes. They did note some traces of caffeine, but it had appeared to be several days old. Compared to his regular consumption, it seems like he was not drinking it for a couple days before he had deceased. And they did note some GHB being found in his system. I got to tell you, GHB for me is a little controversial. It comes up in these cases, especially around the smiley face killer theory, a lot. And the case studies in Drowning Forensics book does a really good job of helping me understand a bit more of why that's looking suspicious, particularly in this case. If you do some quick research on GHB, you will find out that it is produced by the body. In particular, it happens during fermentation as well. So once someone dies and their body starts decomposing, you can get increased levels of GHB being found in the person's body. However, at least according to the research done by Professor Gilbertson that I reviewed, the levels that would increase are relatively a small amount, and the amount that was found in Jelani's body seems to suggest a much larger dosage, likely that he may have been drugged. Back to the timeline. Later that day, when canines were brought in to pick up the scent, they followed the same route that the girlfriend had traveled. After bringing the dogs back to the starting point and picking up no new scent, it was supposed that the dogs were picking up on the hoodie that the girlfriend was wearing that used to belong to Jelani. At no time did the dogs lead the investigators anywhere near the golf course. No more searches with the canine units were carried out. The house in Anoka was not scented, and cadaver dogs were not used. Maybe because Jelani was found relatively quickly. As a matter of fact, it took them a couple days to get a search warrant for that house, but they did get a search warrant, I believe 3 days after he went disappearing, and they did search the house. We're going to bump into a little more detail on that here. Anoka Police Department and Anoka Fire Rescue crews began searching in and around the Rum River on Monday, April 20th. Law enforcement also began preliminary searches along the Mississippi. Anoka police officers executed a search warrant that day at the residence where Jelani was last known to be, but did not find any clues. The next day, Tuesday, April 21st, the Anoka County Sheriff's Office officially joined the search effort. At 3 p.m., family, friends, and a group of volunteers met in the parking lot of the Champlain Super Target in order to organize search parties. They spread out from there in their vehicles, covering all of the locations where he had been reported, as well as the routes in between. They found no clues. Saturday, April 25th, 2009, an employee of the Green Haven Golf Course in Anoka was playing golf on his day off. At about 1:04, he noticed something floating in the middle of the large pond on the west side of the clubhouse between holes 10, 11, and 18. He went to take a closer look and discovered that it was a body. He immediately called 911. Law enforcement arrived and found Jelani floating on his back in approximately 2 to 3 feet of water. He was found with his face exposed above the water and his right hand sticking up out of the water, which of course raised some questions for me pretty quickly. 2 to 3 feet of water obviously is not very deep. There is a process that happens to the body when it goes through decomposition, particularly in water. If it is on its back, sometimes the water will fill the lungs. The lungs will drain all of their air, and that will be enough to take the body below the water. And that's what I was originally wondering in this case before I read the information sent from Professor Gilbertson. However, the information that they sent basically kind of throws all that out the window. The coroner, when she conducted the autopsy, noted that bloating had not begun yet in his body. There were several other indicators. They're a bit technical to go into for the purposes of this episode, but for example, changes that happen around the eyes and the cornea, some blood pooling that had appeared on his back. The end result of their analysis is that he likely only died a few days before he was found, and that he was originally dead outside of the pool of water, and he was lying on his back at some location because all the blood in his body basically settled on his back. He was then placed into the water and subsequently found. And that kind of makes sense if you think about, this is an active golf course. It's actually so active that they only closed the back 9 for about an hour once they actually discovered his body and removed it. So the likelihood that the body was in a 2 to 3 foot shallow pond where they found it sticking up out of the water, the likelihood that it was there for more than a day, I think, is extremely low. I think that you would have likely had some golfers. There's a lot of eyes on golf courses. You have, depending on the popularity of the golf course, you could literally have hundreds of people coming through those same spots over and over, day after day. So that was something that always bothered me about this. But now, considering this new analysis from the book, I have different questions that are kind of just as big. For example, if he didn't die until 2 days before he was found, let's say even 3 days on the long end, that means for 4 to 5 days he is being held somewhere or is subdued in some way. There were no marks found on his body. There's no trauma to his body. There's no injury to his brain that could suggest that someone whacked him over the head or something along those lines. And the clean socks thing keeps bugging me. If you were held captive somewhere and someone had taken your shoes for some reason, your socks were probably going to be pretty dirty, even if you were just in a small room. Outside of that, I personally would be trying to get out or to make sounds so other people could hear me and help me. There would probably be some bruising, particularly on my hands. If you try to dig your way out, you're probably going to damage your fingernails, maybe tear some fingernails off. From the information I've seen, and I have not seen the official autopsy report, none of that stuff is found. There is no trauma to his body. So a lot of questions about if you slide his time of death that far forward, what happened to him in those period of days? What the heck was going on? I'm really not sure. Here we get some more information. A full body scan indicated that there were no cracked or broken bones. There were no foreign objects in his body, like a bullet, a broken off knife blade, or a surgical pin, or a screw. The condition of Jelani's body at the time of autopsy and the rate at which it was decomposing confirmed that he had not been deceased any longer than about 36 to 48 hours. Jelani had to be placed in the pond during the quietest time of night, say between midnight and 5 a.m. This timeline fits if you take into account the hours that the golf course is open. Had he been put into the pond any earlier or later than that, someone would have seen him there before the employee did. Now, something else that bothers me about this analysis, I can't tell if, the book goes into all the steps that they use for determining when he could have died. And I know that they were in contact with the woman that had done the autopsy. Did she draw those own conclusions on her own as well prior to the information that was given to her by the authors of the book? I don't know, but it doesn't seem like it, because I'm seeing comments from law enforcement where they're not acknowledging the time of death properly. For example, here is an article. The autopsy did determine that Brinson's body was moved 12 to 20 hours after he died, according to Douglas. Tampering with a body is a crime. The time of death is suspected to be the Friday evening he went missing. It really doesn't make sense to me. They're actually using the decomposition to note when his body would have been moved, but they're not using the decomposition to note when he actually would have died. There are certain things that happen to the body within a week of it being deceased that his body did not do. So I don't know why law enforcement, or maybe it's just this guy in particular, doesn't have all of the proper information in this case. But in a case that's already very difficult to understand and solve, you have law enforcement potentially asking people about, did you see this guy somewhere on the wrong day? Dr. Amatuzio was very upset at not being able to figure out what had killed this young man who seemed to be in perfect health. She did say that his brain may have been slightly swollen, but there were no indications of any kind of blow to the head. The only other thing noticed was that Jelani's liver and kidneys exhibited mild congestion, like that found in a person with sickle cell anemia. Also, the ventricles of his heart were a little thick. I was really racking my brain about this information and did a little research in terms of autopsy results and what types of deaths are very hard to detect in them. And I just had this thought about, if you are keeping this guy subdued somewhere, let's say that they're pumping him with GHB and they're keeping him knocked out, because there's no marks on his body, I have to think that he is being incapacitated. They also are not noting any ligature marks, so he's not being incapacitated by being tied down, at least from the information that I can review. Is it possible that if they were keeping him drugged that whole time, that he could have died of dehydration and or starving? And this touches a little bit on some of that information. His kidneys would likely be affected, particularly if he was dehydrating. They could look at his bladder to see if he was going through dehydration, but I didn't see any notes about that in the chapter in particular. But as a possible theory that I'm just kind of wrestling with at this point after reviewing all this information, it seems to me someone kept him subdued somewhere, and they had to do it in a way that was going to keep his body pristine. Not that that was their intent, but that's just what actually happened. What kind of conditions could you do that in? Finding GHB in his system already? Yeah, perhaps they could keep him drugged and essentially knocked out for days on end. And of course, if he's not drinking any water, within 3 or 4 days, I'm pretty sure that that could be fatal. But I'm not a doctor, and it is just a theory, though I will be kicking that theory back to Professor Gilbertson just to get some more input on that. If he gives me any firm information on that one way or another, I will certainly fire up another video and share it with you guys. All items he had on him the day he disappeared have been found with him or on the ground. His wallet was found on his body, which seems to rule out robbery as a motive. It is worth noting that there was no money found in the wallet. However, it did have all of his cards. If someone did rob him, I think there's some potential that they took the cash only if he had a significant amount of cash in there. His cell phone was found in his pocket, but there was no mention as to whether or not the phone has any data on it that was usable. Man, what I wouldn't give to review that cell phone for myself. It was a BlackBerry, apparently. And really the ping data. I would really, really want to review the ping data. Another thing that was found on his body in one of his pockets was dental floss. And it just struck me a little bit odd. I mean, I know some people care more about their oral hygiene than others. I personally don't carry around dental floss on me. He was bouncing around meeting girls that night, so it's possible that he wanted to keep his teeth clean or something. But with some of the analysis that I read in the chapter, it was leading me down the road of thinking, is there any potential that he's doing some kind of dealing here? Now, admittedly, they looked at the toxicology. We have a lot of input from friends and family about him being religious. I don't think that he is a user of harsh drugs. I should probably be clear with you guys, though. I have had experience in the past where I've known people that worked in that profession, and they're not always users of what they're selling. The thing about dental floss is occasionally that is used to create bindles of certain types of drugs. They essentially will take a wad of paper, wad it all up with the drug inside of it, and then use dental floss to tie it off. And they do that in particular as opposed to giving it to people in baggies or Ziplocs or something like that, because once you cut the dental floss, the bag's open and the person is more likely to use all of it. So that's the only thing that hit me with a little bit. When you look at his pattern that night of driving all over town, bouncing from one place to the next, to the point where the authors of the case studies in drowning forensics are asking, what could he have been doing? He's stopping at each place and he only has like 5 minutes to be there. Well, I think there's some potential that there was some type of dealing going on there. I'm not certain about it. Maybe with his intent to find marijuana for that night, could he have been trying to buy some and he was going up meeting with a bunch of different people? Certainly that's also possible. I'm not trying to paint that this is a person that was certainly dealing drugs, but the dental floss thing, I don't know. You guys tell me, is it that practical to be carrying around dental floss in your pocket? I personally haven't experienced it myself. Maybe I should. I don't know. But outside of that, it's just such a tough case to understand on so many fronts because there's so little information. We don't even have a real cause of death. We don't have a very good timing in terms of death. It seems to be not understood by law enforcement, maybe understood better by forensic people that are reviewing it much after the fact. There are no recent articles or developments about this case going on at all. It really seems sad that this guy that seemed like a perfectly likable, nice guy, that had a lot going on with his future, was kind of taken off this planet in this way. And it does seem pretty clear that this is foul play, that something happened to him, but we don't know what, we don't know where, and we don't even know when. And finally, the day before Jelani's body was found, his girlfriend Dina learned that she was pregnant with their second child. She has since named the child a little boy, Jelani Dante Brinson Jr., after his father. And here is a quick shot of the pond, the golf course where they found him. One other thing to note, he was found in the middle of that pond, which is a bit strange. 2 to 3 feet deep isn't really deep enough for someone to have put him in at the edge and then him go floating around it. It seems like someone waded out to the center of the pond and tried to put him in the center of it. Some people seem to suggest maybe that meant that it was someone that knew him, that they were trying to, place him in the center. I don't know if it's that or if they're just trying to hide him. Although if you're going to place him in the center, aren't you going to try to weigh him down in some way? I don't know. Understanding the motivation of how that body was found is very, very tough. Is this someone that knew about the smiley face killer theory and was trying to emulate it to throw off the police? Is this someone that knew about those friends in particular? Is this a neighbor that just went crazy and saw this guy walking through his yard and did something to him? It's tough for me to believe that, in particular when you have his shoes and hat being found a day after he goes missing, which supposedly he's not even dead at that point yet. And there is something that I haven't seen in in all the analysis that I've read about this case. Here in Minnesota, there is a very interesting culture that I didn't know before I lived out here, where people take off their shoes, and they're just used to doing that because during the winter months you have, snow and muck and mud all over your shoes. So they get used to taking off their shoes in the doorway. Like literally, even if you hire a contractor to come to your house to do something, as soon as they step in the front door, they'll either take their shoes off or they'll put on some type of boots or protective covering over their shoes. It occurs to me that perhaps Jelani got to the party, got to the house, took his hat and his shoes off so he could go inside and hang out or whatever, and maybe something happened to him at that point. Maybe they took him away. Maybe he had some type of event and it freaked them all out and they didn't want to call law enforcement and they tried to keep him somewhere to hopefully bring him back or something. I don't know, but getting his shoes and his hat in particular separated from him out here in this state isn't too hard if he's going over to someone's house. I'm telling you, I've seen it time and time again here. It's almost automatic. So, I don't know, just something else I wanted to add to the mix on all this. This is where I turn it over to you guys. Please, if you have any thoughts, more information, share it in the comments below, and maybe we can get some more eyes and ears on this case, and maybe someone can come up with the right theory about what's going on here. There are so many big loose pieces, it's very, very hard to understand. But someone out there, I'm pretty certain someone in particular knows the truth. Is it one of those 3 guys? I have no idea. Is it some random stranger? Could be. Is there someone else that's not even part of this story as I've told it yet that we don't know of that had some motive to do this? Perhaps. I don't know. I'm at a loss. And that's why I call this show BrainScratch. Thank you so much for joining me. I truly appreciate each and every one of you out there, and thank you for spending this time with me. Have a great weekend, and I'll catch you next week on the Geek and Dorks channel. Take care.